Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and I feel like I've done enough Mythic Pluses to put together an Outlaw Rogue Mythic Plus guide. I might make more guides for the other specs as well, as for the most part this week I have been grinding on my Outlaw Rogue. It's a mix of trying to get some of the seasonal stuff done while also trying to slay Denathrias on Heroic Week 1, which has been keeping me pretty busy. But I've been spending a lot of time on my Outlaw Rogue trying to gear him up as best as I can. And I picked up a couple tricks for Mythic Pluses, and in this video I want to cover majority of the stuff that's going to be dedicated primarily when it comes to playing Outlaw Rogue in Mythic Plus. All the talents you need, the playstyle, as well as all the different utilities that you bring into dungeons. And you bring a lot of different utilities that can help your group succeed. So let's get into the video. And first things first, a lot of the stuff that will be covered in this video, I actually covered on the original Outlaw Rogue PvE raiding guide. This has been the generalized PvE guide for Outlaw Rogue for this first season. A lot of the stuff talked about in this video is also kind of going to be duplicated with that video. So instead, for things like stats, to find out what your best in slot stats are, gearing, as well as enchants and consumables, I would probably just have you guys go watch that video. So video to the original Outlaw Rogue PvE guide will be down in the link below. This video is primarily going to cover everything that you need to know for Mythic Pluses and how things kind of change a little bit from the generalized stuff into Mythic Plus in particular. But for stats, as well as consumables and enchants and other stuff, the basics, definitely go watch that video, link down in description. Okay, so we'll be taking a look at the Outlaw Rogue stuff and how are things going to be a little different. First of all, the talents are going to be set up slightly different, as well as a couple other things. We are going to most likely be using this set of talents for a variety of different situations. In the first row, generally Quick Draw is the best option. It provides us extra common points, extra energy, it's very consistent. Ghost of Strike has a lot of single target potential at a later time with different kinds of gear and specific legendaries, so we won't be running that in Mythic Pluses. Weapon Master has some uses, specifically with certain legendaries. We'll cover about legendaries in just a moment, but most of you guys will end up running Quick Draw because it's simply better. In level 25, I kind of like the range extra on Acrobatic Strikes. Everyone else that plays Outlaw likes this, so this is our default. You could technically go retractable hook if you feel like mobility is an issue for you, or even just hit and run, but I feel like mobility isn't an issue when you can just reach the enemy from further away. At level 30, we actually have some options. If you're someone who is used to playing Outlaw Rogue, Mark for Death is a better option. It offers you a lot of resets potential with mobs constantly dying inside of Mythic Pluses on trash packs. It also has a variety of uses for single target as well, for getting your Assassination up really early. It's really good all around in dungeon situations, mostly for the resets, but it is harder to play with. It is an extra ability for you to kind of keep up with, and trying to keep this ability on cooldown all the time can be difficult for someone who is new. If you're someone who's kind of new to the game, I would just go with Vigor if you're just trying to get your weekly 10s or later on 15s. I feel like it's a pretty easy talent for a lot of you guys to deal with. Gives you extra energy and slightly extra energy regen. But if you're someone who is thinking of actually pushing keys like really seriously on Outlaw, I would go with Mark for Death. At level 35, Cheat Death is probably the best choice, just because having that safety net allows you to either cheat death the mechanic, or if you were to make a mistake inside of a trash bowl, you kind of get a second go at it. It's just a good all-arounder for all types of dungeons. At level 40, we actually are playing a lot with Dirty Tricks, or I am, but also a lot of other Outlaw Rogues are. In the past expansion, we had Between the Eyes that would stun the enemy, and playing with Prey in the Weak just added extra damage to the enemies that were stunned. It was kind of a no-brainer wombo combo. And even in dungeons, you can still play Prey in the Weak, but now you have to kitten shot enemies like every other rogue in order to land an extra stun. This does kind of limit the strength of Outlaw to some extent. The constant stuns back to back were really good when it comes to stopping enemies from casting, or simply just one less target to auto attack your tank. But I feel like with this setup, the playstyle with Outlaw, we don't really lose too much not going Prey in the Weak. You can if you feel like there's going to be priority of targets in dungeons, but you don't necessarily have to. Blinding Powder is exceptionally good in some situations, but Dirty Tricks is just really good for the free gouge. You are going to be gouging enemies in order to stop a cast at the end of a cast, or stop a channel as soon as it starts, and having that utility in this row, I think, is just going to be the best option for most of you guys to enjoy. Level 45, I have had a lot of success with Alacrity. I feel like it's just a really good consistent talent. Haste is constantly there on trashbacks and bosses, unless for some reason you wipe. Dreadblades can be good in some situations if you need burst, but I haven't really found those situations a lot in dungeons. It feels like consistency of haste is just really good. Loaded dice isn't bad either, but at the beginning when we have not a lot of gear, I think Alacrity is going to be a go-to. Maybe at a later time when we have enough baseline haste, you could try loaded dice. And then level 50, there are not a lot of options. Most rogues gravitate towards Blade Rush. The reason is because Blade Rush doesn't have any AoE caps. As a spec, we are AoE capped, which I'll talk about in a bit when it comes to rotation and AoE and performance, but Blade Rush doesn't have any caps. It does quite a bit of damage, it gives you energy, it's on a fairly short cooldown, so you can use it quite often. Killing Spree can be played in some situations. There are bosses that take extra damage or allow for mechanics where you do extra damage for a limited amount of time. So if you're in a dungeon with a lot of non-elite trash packs that just don't have a lot of health, Killing Spree can be a very efficient way of going about it. And Killing Spree can be a bursty choice when it comes to those bosses where there are moments where you can do more damage to them. There isn't a lot of bosses on every single dungeon, but they do exist a lot more than the last expansion in this expansion. So it is an option in very few situations, but if you're not really sure and not really well versed with Outlaw, I would just go with Blade Rush. You also can play Dance and Steel if you feel like your Blade Flurry uptime is very, very low. That will come with gear. Some of you guys will have better gear and will have constant uptime. Some of you won't have a lot of good gear and you feel like it falls off all the time. Take Dance and Steel if you're just simply not sure, but generally Blade Rush is the play. There are a couple different legendaries you can play as an Outlaw rogue. The best one is going to be Celerity. Celerity is just a go-to legendary for us, with Adrenaline Rush providing 8% extra damage while Adrenaline Rush is up, and Slice and Dice has a chance to activate Adrenaline Rush for 3 seconds. It procs quite often, increases your uptime of Adrenaline Rush throughout the dungeon towards like 30, 40, and maybe even 50% if you get really lucky. Imagine spending 40 or 50% of a dungeon with Adrenaline Rush up. That's a lot of energy, lower global cooldown, more auto attacks. It just kind of benefits all around. It's just a good all-rounder legendary for all types of situations. Concealed Blunderbuss is the legendary you can actually play Weapon Master, the talent, with. Since the strike hits, at an additional time, have a 40% chance to make your next pistol shot fired 2 additional times. This will give you a lot of burst, but also a lot of combo points to spend. So, going with a Weapon Master, it generally ends up giving you more procs. Gauss Charm isn't a bad legendary. It's not quite as good Celerity, but it's okay. Greenskin's Wickers can be good, but generally doesn't seem nearly as high as every other Lego. Then we have Mark of the Master Assassin. While stealth is active and for 4 seconds after breaking stealth, your crit chance increases by 100%. 100% crit Lego is really strong, especially in dungeons where we get constant resets from trashbacks to trashbacks. And with Outlaw having a shorter cooldown of Vanish, not directly, but with as you spend comp points into finishes, you do reduce the cooldown of a lot of your major abilities, Vanish being one of them. You do end up having a shorter than a 2-minute cooldown of Vanish on average. So landing that Vanish for a critical moment where a boss takes more damage, you get 100% crit, slap a trinket into that rotation wombo combo, and you will have yourself a really strong opener or a really strong burst opportunity. This one ends up being pretty good, but if you're not sure, Celerity is one that you should probably be aiming for. Lastly, I'll talk about which conduits are the best for Mythic Pluses, and they're going to be exactly the same as in raiding. Count the Odds ends up being a really solid choice. Ambush and Dispatch have a 21% chance, or depending on the item level of this conduit for you, for me it's 21% chance, to grant you an extra buff that you do not already have for 5 seconds. And we end up using these buffs to do quite a lot of damage. You'll be going through a lot of dispatches, getting buffs regularly, and it'll kind of just continue fueling your gameplay forward. If you do end up getting more than one potency conduit, Sleight of Hand is also pretty good. Roll the Bones has a 40% chance, increased chance of granting you additional matches, so that's a lot more Roll the Bones opportunity combos for you. So those end up being pretty good for both PvE as well as raiding as well as Mythic Plus situations. At some point there was a build with Ambidextrous for Mastery, but I feel like that build died out when they completely nerfed this one to the ground way back on the beta. And I don't think we'll be seeing that one coming back anytime soon. So Count the Odds and Sleight of Hand are your 2 best potency conduits. We do, however, have Endurance conduits as well as Finesse conduits that can be helpful. Quick Decision gives you extra range on your grapple hook and slightly shorter cooldown. Prepared for All dodges give you a shorter evasion, and interrupts give you faster Cloak of Shadows, which also can be exceedingly strong in Mythic Plus situations. Faster cooldowns in order to deal with variety of mechanics. Recuperator as an endurance is also really good. You maintain slice as basically the whole fight, so getting extra healing from it can be really good. So pick and choose whichever finesse and endurance conduits you feel like suit your best situation. I've been a huge fan of the Quick Decision so far, but I could totally see running Prepared for All if you are constantly doing mechanics where you have to cloak, have to pop evasion, to dodge mechanics, or to soak mechanics from boss opportunities and trash packs. Next, we'll talk about the utility Outlaw rogues bring to Mythic Pluses. In fact, most of these utilities are shared amongst rogues, so let's take a look at everything that your rogue will be bringing if you decide to play in M+. Let's take a look at the new utility, which is going to be Numbing Poison. Go-to weapon with a non-lethal poison, which gives you a chance to cloud the enemy's attacks, or cloud the enemy's mind, slowing down their attacks and cast speed by 15%. It is like a weaker version of the curses that warlocks bring with Curse of Tongues as well as Curse of Weakness, but they're not so weak to the point where it's not worth applying on your weapon. You definitely should be running Mind Numbing Poison, or Numbing Poison since they changed the name of it, and combining that together in a lot of the dungeons with Shiv, since Shiv with Numbing Poison has a de-enrage effect now. So Hunters and Druids previously were two classes that could de-enrage quite easily, and now as a rogue you join their ranks with an ability for 20 energy, 25-second cooldown. Our cooldown for this ability is quite long, so it is going to be a little bit iffy if you have an enemy who's constantly re-enraging, but if you have someone who's going to enrage from time to time, rogues bring an exceptional utility to their groups. Let's talk about utility that has already been in the game, Tricks of Trade. You'll allow yourself to help the tank generate more threat. You'll redirect whatever threat you generate to the tank, and this can be really strong when you're running with classes that are uncapped with AoE that have big bursty cooldowns like Fire Mages and Marksman Hunters. So you're helping your tank wrestle the aggro away from those big bursty classes towards the tank so your group can be relatively safe through encounters. Concealment is a very, very strong ability that allows your whole groups to skip trash packs and skip whatever you want to, because you don't need to kill every single mob in a dungeon to get your percentage. You can choose to kill certain easier mobs while avoiding tougher mobs. This has become a little bit more competitive together with Soothe, which priests now bring. So not having a rogue in your team isn't a necessity as much anymore, but Shroud still dominates Soothe because there are some tight spots where even with the Soothe, you can't quite get past mobs. So as a rogue, you still bring that as a very powerful utility. Of course, rogues bring a lot of CC, from kidney shots, stuns, gouges, with Outlaw in particular, blind, saps, cheap shots, interrupts. There's a variety of different CC that you bring in as a rogue. And that CC can also be augmented, like for example, if you are Venthyr with the Nagia Soulbind, you have the Saurian Teleport, which can add even more CC. So utilize that CC in order to stop important casts or powerful attacks, interrupt channels, and you kind of are going to be the CC head of the group, which crowd control is quite often used in Mythic Plus dungeons. Alright, let's take a look at how you're going to go into trash packs in most cases. So in most openers, this is what I do. First of all, you want to be in stealth. Pop yourself, roll the bones, and what I'll usually do is mark for death a target, slice and dice as we open up, ambush, and now I'm starting my rotation. I'll be basically playing my single target rotation, trying to build combo points and trying to maintain between the eyes on the highest health target inside of a dungeon trash pack or on a boss as much as I can. Build up my combo points to full, using dispatch when I don't need to refresh slice and dice or when I don't need to reapply between the eyes on the enemy. And to transform this rotation from single target to AoE, I'll just press Blade Flurry. And I'll just continue my single target rotation because that is the advantage of Outlaw Rogue. You don't really need to do much in regards to it. And I'll try to apply Adrenaline Rush on cooldown as much as I can. And that's really what it comes down to playing Outlaw Rogue. Maintaining Blade Flurry as often as you can, especially in trash packs, or don't worry about it on bosses. Maintaining between the eyes on the target and hitting that target because you're more likely to crit when hitting the target with between the eyes. So try to hit them while Blade Flurrying, because when you get a crit on a target that has between the eyes and you Blade Flurrying, that crit will also splash out to everybody else. So the more damage you do to a single target, the more damage you do to everybody in AoE, in some sense. And that's going to be the general playstyle of Outlaw Rogue. We are really strong at 5 or less targets. If you're ever hitting more than one target, always be sure to have Blade Flurry up and running, because outside of that, you're just missing out on free damage. Past 5 targets, however, we are a little bit capped. So this is where our ability of Blade Rush, which also should be used basically on cooldown as long as you're not overcapped on energy, comes in. That ability will help you a little bit extra damage outside of the 5 target cap. But as Outlaw Rogue, it is pretty common to kind of be not at the top of DPS anymore compared to Battle for Azeroth. In BFA, we had insane AoE damage because our AoE was uncapped. We would just go in with all the crazy utility we talked about before and do damage to everybody. Where there were classes like Marksman Hunters and Fury Warriors, which were still really good for M+ at some point or another, but those guys all were capped. So we were uncapped prior, and this cap is going to bring us more in line. It's no longer going to be a group where you just stack a bunch of Outlaw Rogues and maybe a Windwalker Monk to make Outlaw Rogues do more damage or anything like that. Instead, Outlaw Rogues do bring a utility. We do bring consistent AoE. We bring decent single target as well. We don't really have to choose between one and the other. We bring a variety of different utilities that Rogues bring. Shroud, allowing us to transfer threat from us to the tank to help tank manage aggro, while we will be playing with other classes that will do massive burst AoE and burst group damage. Outlaw Rogues, I feel like, still have very competitive damage, but we're going to be more similar to Balance Druids of Battle for Azeroth, where Boomies really could push out some great numbers, but they were there for the utility, and the utility sometimes just made dungeons that much easier rather than just raw damage all the time 24/7. And I think that's where kind of Outlaw Rogue is sliding into. We're going to be still doing competitive damage. We're not going to be at the bottom, or if you are at the bottom, you're probably playing with 2 fire mages combusting every minute or so. So that's going to be, for the most part, normal. But Outlaw Rogues, I feel like, are going to have a bit more utility than we've had before, being able to deal with DN Rages, constant gouges that don't cost energy if you're running with, you know, the proper talents that we talked about, like Dirty Tricks or Prayer in the Week if you need the stuns regularly. I feel like Outlaw Rogues are going to be in a really, really good spot going into this Mythic Plus season. They've been very, very enjoyable to play, extremely enjoyable to play. And the only thing that was kind of jarring to me at first was the damage, but after playing with it for a bit, you realize that you're not there just for strictly damage alone, which I think is a good and healthy way to approach the game, because if Outlaw Rogues were literally top damage all the time, we'd be doing the same thing BFA did, unless you're a double Outlaw Rogue with a Windwalker, Protection Warrior, and Restoration Druid Healer. Nobody really wanted you in your groups. So hopefully with this changes, and with this season, we'll have a lot more composition variety, because I'm a huge fan of so far what Outlaw Rogue is looking like and how it's shaping up to be going forward into this seasonal stuff, going into this expansion. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do as a rogue better when it comes to just playing your character inside of Mythic Pluses. Knowing your rotation is only half the battle, but knowing how the dungeon runs and what you can do in order to help the group have an easier time inside of the dungeons is going to be a huge impact. Knowing when to shroud is also going to be a huge impact, but a lot of that stuff comes on the fly as you learn the dungeons, as you run them, as you try different strats, which is a lot easier if you have guild groups that do it. So go and do some dungeons, learn the strats, learn the mechanics, and look out for ways where you might be able to cheese it, where it's with shroud or maybe with some sort of CC or sap in certain enemies to bypass certain trashbacks. And again, a lot of that stuff will come with time, with experience, but the only way to figure that out is to dive into some Mythic Pluses. So hopefully this guide gave you guys a bit of an idea of what you need to do in order to set your rogue up for M+. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in another one.